Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Tiara Thomas. I'm class of 2012 and currently serve as president of the African American Alumni Association. It is my pleasure to welcome you today. The African American Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve University was officially established in October 2009, and our purpose is to provide support and networking opportunities to African American alumni of CWRU. We work to provide a forum for the university to recruit students and foster friendships among those connected with the university. So before we begin today's program, just a few quick housekeeping notes. As you will notice, everyone is muted by default. We ask that you please remain muted to limit background noise during the program. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we will do our best to get those answered for you. So that we know who you are, we welcome you to rename yourself by clicking on Participants, finding your name, and then using the More option and selecting Rename. Finally, if you're able, we ask that you please turn on your video. We like to see your smiling faces. And with that, I am so happy to welcome you to this installment of Profiles of Inclusive Excellence, which is a virtual series in collaboration with the African American Alumni Association, the Office for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and the African and African American Studies program to highlight the work and research of our African American faculty. Our host for this evening is Dr. Heather Burton. She is Associate Vice President and Senior Director for Faculty and Institutional Diversity with the university, specializing in gender and racial equity. With that, I now turn over the program to Dr. Burton.
Thank you, Tiara. Thank you so much. And I want to say welcome to everyone. We're excited to have with us tonight Dr. Stephen Haynesworth. And many of you on the call know Dr. Haynesworth and are friends with Dr. Haynesworth. So hopefully you will learn new information that you have not learned about Dr. Haynesworth in the lifetime of working with alongside him. I think one of the things that we love about Profiles of Inclusive Excellence is it really gives us an opportunity to meet individuals differently than we typically meet them on campus. And so in that, to not prolong my talking, is I would rather hear from Dr. Haynesworth than me. So we will get things started. And I think, typically Dr. Haynesworth, I'm sure by now you're kind of familiar, you've heard about how we do things here on Inclusive Profiles of Excellence. And and what I will say is that these interviews started about 3 years ago. And I think that speaks volumes to where we are as an institution. That and one of the reasons that myself, along with Quad A and the African American Studies minors started these profiles was that when I started on campus, people kept saying, we don't have any Black faculty. And my argument was, no, our numbers don't match what they should be when we're really talking about the true definition of diversity. However, we do have Black faculty, and we have Black faculty that are doing some great work. And so as a collaboration, we created this Profiles of Inclusive Excellence to really highlight our faculty. And so we kind of started with this tradition of asking our faculty, for those who may not be familiar, there's a movie that's called Brown Sugar. And in that movie, it deals with the theme of hip hop. And it stars Sanaa Lathan and Taye Diggs. And the prominent question that happens throughout this entire movie is when did you fall in love with hip hop? And so we kind of tweak it, even though last interview was very interesting because the interviewee answer the question of when she fell in love with hip hop. But what we do is we like to tweak it to your academic discipline and ask Dr. Haynesworth, when did you fall in love with biology?
Well, first, just let me say thank you for inviting me to participate in this series. Thanks to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Equal Opportunity, to the African American Alumni Association, and to the African and African American Studies minor. I think this series is so important because, as Dr. Burton said, there aren't a lot of us on campus, but even though there aren't a lot of us, we don't all know each other. And even those individuals who we know, for the most part, we don't know their stories, their journeys. And so, I've tuned into a couple of these profiles live and have recently learned that they were recorded and have listened to a couple of them recorded. Am I flicking? Why am I flicking like that?
No, it looks like it's someone else's name.
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
sure because now it just switched to me. So I'm not sure what's happening with Beth.
Okay.
Beth, I'm going to turn your camera off for just yeah, thanks. Okay, I'm sorry, Dr. Haynesworth.
No, but I've just been inspired by listening to all of the journeys of my colleagues. So thank you for doing this series. The one thing that I have a regret on is that when you tell me that this has been going on for 3 years, that I haven't had my students in the Emerging Scholars Program tune into these. And so now that I know that they're being recorded, I'm definitely going to encourage them to tune into the recorded profiles, because I think it's so important for them to hear the stories and the journeys of these faculty members. So to answer your question, when did I fall in love with biology? And by the way, I'm not a big hip hop fan, but I have seen the movie Brown Sugar a couple of times. One of my wife's favorite actresses is Sanaa Lathan. So we've seen most of the Sanaa Lathan movies. So I'm very familiar with the movie. And it's an interesting question for me because, I've been a faculty member for 31 years here at Case Western Reserve. So what I do now and what I study now, I really study student success now, which is very different from the adult stem cell biology that I studied when I first came to Case Western Reserve. But let me just tell you how I fell in love with biology. I've always been in love with biology from the time I was a little boy. I like to be outdoors and throw ants into spider webs and see what happens. And so I took all of the science courses in high school and then majored in biology in college. I didn't know when I went to college what I wanted to do with the biology. I'd never met a biologist. I'd never met a scientist. So like many of my students, I decided that, I'd like to go to medical school. My older brother at the time I went into college was a first-year medical student, so I thought I'd walk in his footsteps. And then that plan changed after my sophomore year in college when I got a summer job in a hospital, which I really enjoyed. I had a job as an orderly, when they don't call them orderlies anymore. They used to be physician's assistants in the emergency room. And it was a great job. I got to do things that they would never allow students to do now. I inserted urinary catheters and shaved patients for surgery and took vital signs. It was a wonderful job for a 19-year-old. But I did know by the end of that summer that I didn't want to be a doctor. And so, I came back from my junior year and I talked to my advisor and he said, "You should be a teacher." And I said, "I'll never be a teacher." He said, "Why not?" I said, "I went to Shaw High School and I know how we treated teachers at Shaw High School. And so I'll never be a teacher." And so he says, "No, I think that you would really make a good teacher." And I really liked my college advisor. And so I started taking education courses and I loved them. And then I did student teaching. I went to Heights High School and I did student teaching there. And I loved that. And interestingly, when I was at Heights High School doing my student teaching, the librarian turned out to be the wife of my old high school principal. So she said, "You should call him for a job." And so I ended up going back to Shaw High School and teaching high school biology, the thing that I said I would never do. And I loved doing that too. I loved teaching biology in high school. But I did realize by the end of that first year that I missed the science. And so, again, I didn't know what I wanted to do with science, but I did know that I wanted to get back into science. But my initial plan was I began thinking, I'm 23 years old. I don't have any kids. I don't have a wife. My parents are in good shape. I think I want to travel. So I think I'll go and teach biology in Africa. So I decided that I wanted to go to Africa. I wanted to tour the continent of Africa and I could teach biology and make money. But all of the NGOs, all of the non-governmental organizations that would allow me to teach biology requested a master's degree. So I said, well, I'll go back and get a master's degree and then I'll go to Africa. So I applied to 3 schools, Case Western Reserve, Cleveland State, and Pitt. Cleveland State rejected me, and Case Western Reserve and Pitt accepted me. So I came here to Case Western Reserve, and here's the end of the story. When I got accepted here, I had to pick a biology advisor. So I went and talked to a couple of professors, and I talked to this one professor, Dr. Arnold Kaplan, who was going to be on the call tonight. But this is the first night of Passover, and he couldn't be on the call. And by the way, happy Passover to all of my Jewish friends and colleagues who are on the call tonight. Thanks for coming. But, I met with him. I told him how excited I was. I want to go to Africa, and I'm going to teach biology and tour the continent of Africa. And I remember this meeting very vividly, because this is when I fell in love with biology. He leaned over and pulled his glasses down like this, and he said, I don't advise and teach students to go to college, to go to Africa to teach biology. I advise and teach students to strive to get a Nobel Prize. And I remember going back to my apartment that night and thinking, who's this guy, telling me that, me going to Africa is not something. But, then I started thinking, maybe I'll get one of those Nobel Prizes. Mm-hmm. So it inspired me to begin thinking about research. And so I was only admitted to the master's degree program there, but then the next year I transferred to the PhD program, and that's how I got into biology.
Yeah, that is a great story. And so many things in just this first part that you said, Dr. Haynesworth, that I want to ask follow-up questions, that my mind is going everywhere. But because there was just so many things. I've got Africa, we've got the biology aspect, we've got the Nobel Prize. But I think we've got Shaw High School, and we know that Shaw High School graduates are committed, dedicated, and it's Shaw for life. So I have all of that, and I will get back to that. Sure. But what I was wondering is, as you talk about this, as you talk about your master's, your PhD, and working at Case, what was it that kept you here at this institution for your 2 degrees plus becoming faculty? Yeah.
Well, actually, Dr. Burton, I actually left. So after I got my PhD, I decided initially that I didn't want to stay in academia. And the reason was I was intimidated by what faculty have to do to survive in academia, and especially in the STEM fields, and writing research grants and having to keep yourself funded in the publisher parish environment that we're in. It was daunting. I saw my professors spending so much time writing research grants, and I wasn't sure that this was what I wanted to do. So I left, and I went to a pharmaceutical postdoc for a year. And within that 1 year, I learned that the freedom of being able to be an academic and do the work that I wanted to do, I really missed that. So after that 1 year, I started looking to get back into academia. So I began applying to postdoctoral positions. I was offered a great postdoctoral position at Columbia University. And again, here's my mentor again, Dr. Kaplan. I knew that he knew the professor who I was going to work for, who was a very well-known professor in the field. So I called him up. I said, I got this great offer to be a postdoc at Columbia. What do you think? So he said, I think it's a great offer. I gave him all of the specifics. And then he said, so, one of my senior research associates is leaving to take a faculty position. So if you come back to the lab, I'll match the offer. So I hung up the phone, and I called upstairs to my wife. I said, Arnold said, if I come back, he'll match the offer. She said, let's go. So we came back to Case. So that's how I got back to the university. And then Dr. Kaplan and I embarked on a new field of research, a brand new field of research, of trying to identify a unique cell that we hypothesized exists in bone marrow that would be a stem cell for all of this skeletal and connective tissues of the body, bone, cartilage, tendon, ligament, fat, muscle, etc. We knew that there was a blood cell that existed in the bone marrow that gives rise to all of the blood cells. We hypothesized that there was what we call a mesenchymal stem cell that gives rise to all of the skeletal and connective tissue. And so that became my project. And we were able to actually show that this cell exists, and we developed technology to isolate the cell and even drive it down different pathways to make different tissues on demand depending upon how we stimulate the cell. And so we then started a biotech company. Dr. Kaplan was the lead in this, and I was one of the co-founders of this biotech company to commercialize this. And then I had to make a decision because the company was starting, and I had the opportunity to apply for a faculty position in the department. And at that time, I said, I want to remain in academia. I had been exposed to industry, so I didn't want to go the industry route. So I wanted to be able to do my own research. And so that's how I became a faculty member here at the university.
I love it. I love it. And speaking of that, and I'm going to come back to emerging scholars, but what are you working on now? What research are you working on now? Or is most of your time just dedicated to emerging scholars?
So as you know, I took kind of the first third of my 30 years were in the laboratory, head down, doing research. About 12 years in, I was asked to come for a 1-year stint into the office of the dean to fill in for an associate dean who had gone over to MSAS as an interim dean. And then I ended up staying there for 20 years as associate dean. And so during that period, I really stopped doing stem cell research. At a certain time, at a certain point during those 20 years, it's kind of hard to compete with. Some people can do this, but I couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. To do full-time administration and full-time research and full-time teaching and be a full-time dad and a full-time husband. So something had to give, right? And so I stopped doing research and became a full-time administrator in the dean's office. And I love that too. I was able to help run the college for 20 years and help faculty pursue their research and their teaching and their service obligations and have space. And, I was the research associate dean and the facilities associate dean. And then about halfway through that 20-year stint, I helped lead an effort to develop the Emerging Scholars Program, this program to help students from the Cleveland area excel when they come to Case Western Reserve, because the history was that these students, many of them struggled a lot and didn't excel. And so we are now in our 13th year of the Emerging Scholars Program. I left the dean's office about a year and a half ago. And so now I will be doing, I'm on sabbatical, full year sabbatical this year, but I will be doing 3 things basically when I come back in the fall. One is continuing to run the Emerging Scholars Program. The other is I'm developing a new biology course. But my scholarship now is actually studying student success, studying, reporting on the data that we've collected over the first 13 years of Emerging Scholars, writing research grants to analyze what we've been doing and what's working in the program, and maybe how do we make the program even better. And then finally, getting research grants to expand what we can do. We always need more funds. My goal before, like I said, I've been here for 31 years. I won't be here forever, but my goal is that the Emerging Scholars Program will be here forever. So that's what I want to do, is to endow this program before I leave this university.
That is, and I was just talking to someone last week about how leadership changes. And if we don't create opportunities for sustainability, institutionalization, then we lose great programs once leadership leaves or leadership changes. So I love hearing the idea of this being endowed. For those who may be on the call, tell us a little bit about the Emerging Scholars Program.
Sure.
Just whatever you want to share.
Yeah. So, like I said, we started the program in the office of the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences under the leadership of Dean Cyrus Taylor 13 years ago. We had a Dean's Cabinet meeting, and we were discussing the fact that several first-year students from CMSD, Cleveland Metropolitan School District, were struggling and were in danger of failing out, and that this was a normal occurrence. And when we looked at the data, we saw that underrepresented minorities overall coming to Case Western Reserve were graduating at 10 to 15% lower rates than the overall student population, and this had been going on for decades. And so the dean gave us free rein and resources to begin researching best practices of how we might develop a student success program to support these students. And so I and my colleague Arthur Evanchek, who's on the call, and Molly Berger, who was associate dean at the time, who's since retired, we began looking at a variety of best practices. And we developed a program that really focuses on a couple of things. One is having high expectations of students. Many of our students come from under-resourced and underperforming schools where, frankly, not a lot is expected of them. And so these are the best students who are going to those schools, but they're not getting a lot of homework, they're not getting a lot of challenge. And so our students are coming in not having developed the skills of knowing how hard you have to work to excel at a university like Case, because no one's ever expected them to have to do that. And also the skills of, how to study in what we call smart work, how to develop relationships with faculty, how to study collaboratively, how to manage one's time. And so high expectations is really the core of what we do. And then we teach students the skills and strategies that I just talked about of how to work smart. And then finally, we watch them like a hawk. And so especially in the first year, we meet with the students very frequently so that they don't fall through the cracks. And we have developed relationships with all of the student support offices and many of the academic departments and the counseling center and financial aid. And so, we, at the first sign of whatever the challenge is for that student, we work with our partners to support the students to deal with that particular challenge. And I will say that just to give you a taste of how it's made a difference, when we came in, the 6-year graduation rate for the students in this, talking about underrepresented minority students from underperforming high schools coming to Case Western Reserve was about 72%, which was about 10% lower than the overall Case Western Reserve student population. So since we're in our 13th year, so we've had 6 classes of students who have been here for at least 6 years. So our 6-year graduation rate now is 93%, which is 10 percentage points higher than the overall Case Western Reserve graduation rate. So, I give all of the credit to these students. These students have all of the potential to excel at Case Western Reserve. And so it is our duty to make sure that we support them so that they can realize the potential that they come here with.
Yeah. And I always, I remember when I first started on campus, Lynn Singer told me 2 names And that's when I was doing work with ASIC SERP and recruiting students for the summer program. And that name was Arthur Evanchek and Stephen Haynesworth with the Emerging Scholars Program. I remember that vividly in the work and just talking about, some of the things that you all were doing and how we emulate that within the ASIC SERP and trying to get, students to understand. Because one thing that I always tell students is if you get into Case Western Reserve, you're academically capable. It's the other barriers that keep them from graduating. It's the other things that influence them not being able to graduate. And I think that's, what you all are doing. It's great because it shows that. And it shows that they have the potential, as you stated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very talented students.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I will, if you all are interested in asking Dr. Haynesworth any questions, please make sure to put those in the chat. I will be taking questions from the chat and from our listening audience. So if you have questions, please put those in the chat. Dr. Haynesworth, as you think about just your commitment to student success and the things that you're doing with emerging scholars and even your path, what was your childhood like? How did that childhood contribute to who you are today?
I grew up in Cleveland. My early childhood was in the Glenville neighborhood of Cleveland. And that was during the 60s. So, you guys know that the 60s, especially the late 60s, were a very tumultuous time in big cities. And so we were right in the middle of the Glenville neighborhood. And when I think of that time, especially considering that yesterday was the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, I think of being in Glenville in 1968. I was 9 years old. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. I have 3 siblings. So there was 1 bedroom for my mom and dad, and there was 1 bedroom for the 4 of us. I'm the 3rd. So I was 9. I had a brother who was 3 years older. So that's 12. And then another brother who was 14. And then my younger brother was 7. So we were all in 1 bedroom. We had bunk beds, and then we had another bed and then a pull-out bed that was underneath the 4th. So my bed was a pull-out bed. So every night I'd pull up the bed and then make it and pull it back under at night. We were at 108th and St. Clair, and our bedroom overlooked the alley where the card game was every night. So there was a light in the alley, and the old men would come out and they would have a card game, and that would be the noise that we would go to sleep at night. And then, so Dr. King was assassinated in April, and then obviously Bobby Kennedy in June. And then in July of 1968, there were the Glenville riots. There were 4 days of shooting and Black nationalists with police. And this happened, a couple of blocks from where I live. And so, I saw the National Guard coming up and down St. Clair Avenue. Now, for a 9-year-old, that was kind of exciting, actually, to tell you the truth. I don't remember being scared. I'm sure that for my parents, it was a totally different level of anxiety that, all of this was going on. And so the year after that, we moved to Cleveland Heights. I'm sure my folks wanted to get out of the Glenville neighborhood and all of what was entailed there. They thought that we would be going to Heights High schools because we moved to Cleveland Heights. What they weren't told when we moved to Cleveland Heights was that we moved to the East Cleveland School District of Cleveland Heights. And so it didn't impact me because actually I went to the elementary school, which actually was in East Cleveland. But it did impact my older brother, who went to Cleveland Heights High School as an 11th grader. He was star of the football team. That football team won their first 6 games that year until someone found out that he was living out of district. And then they had to forfeit all of those games. Because and we didn't know, my parents didn't know. So he ended up getting a scholarship to university school, and I ended up going to Shaw High School after we realized that we were in the East Cleveland School District. But to answer your question, Dr. Burton, we were obviously, I would say, lower middle class in the socioeconomic realm. But my mom was home, my dad was home, they loved each other, they respected each other, and they prioritized us. And so, there were always books in the house. I remember my mother always buying these Time Life books in the mail, and they would come out on all different kinds of topics, animals and photography and how-to and everything. And that was, I don't remember going to the library very much when we lived in Glenville because it wasn't close to the house. But I do remember these Time Life books, and I think that had an impact.
Yeah, I love it. And so the relationship with your siblings. So you're all in this one bedroom, and it's the idea. Was it competitive?
There were kind of the two older brothers and the two younger brothers. So, my oldest brother was 5 years older, and then there was 3 years between me and the second brother. So they were the older guys. In fact, I remember the night that Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. And I said it had to be a weekend. And actually, I looked it up today and it was a Friday night, because they were playing cards. They were playing bid whist with their friends, and I was too young to play. So I was around the table, and I remember when the news came in that Dr. King had been killed, and it was kind of interesting, the reactions, because my parents were very upset, and my brothers, because we had been told everything good about Dr. King, right? But one of their friends said something I'll never forget. He said he was an Uncle Tom anyway. And that just shocked me, and I was like, wow. But it opened my eyes to the diversity of thought in the Black community at the time. There were folks who followed, Malcolm X was dead by that time, but followed a more, didn't follow the nonviolent philosophy of Dr. King. And I just remember listening, because these were the older guys. I was 9 years old. But I remember, so we weren't competitive. If I was competitive with anyone, it was my younger brother. My older brothers, they would just beat me up. So there's no competition.
I don't know if I was supposed to laugh at that, but
it was a joke.
because it's interesting, everything I think about things now, and especially within the school system, things that we did growing up as children that was considered fun, and like all of that now is considered bullying.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right? Like I remember you couldn't leave your books on the end of the desk, because if you left your book, someone's gonna come past and knock your books off the desk. Exactly. It was just a joke of the school, but now I went to an anti-bullying training, and that's bullying. So I was like, wow, I guess we participated.
Well, there was a lot of dozen playing in my household and in my neighborhood. So yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't considered bullying. That was just the way we grew up,
Yep, it was the way that you grew up. There is a question from the chat that I will take. And the question is, has the Emerging Scholars Program helped in increasing the recruitment of underrepresented minorities?
Has it helped we definitely, I would say yes. And I'll tell you, when we first started the program, one of our partners, the VP for undergraduate enrollment, Rick Bischoff, who works very closely with us, there were students who he would not admit because he knew that we didn't have the infrastructure to support these students, even though these students were ranked high in their particular school. You could look at the test scores and the courses that they took and so forth, and know that without some type of infrastructure to help these students develop the skills and strategies. They already had the potential, but to help them develop the skills and strategies to navigate Case Western Reserve, they would not do well. But after a few years of the program demonstrating that we could support students, talented students who may come in who have lacked the support at the high school level, I think that we have expanded the pool of talented students from these under-resourced and underperforming schools that we will bring in. So I would say yes.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think one of the things is the infrastructure is that you all are in place to assist those students and what you've spoken of with the graduation retention rate of what Emerging Scholars has done for that to increase. Remember that if you have a question for Dr. Haynesworth, please, by all means, put that in the chat. I will take questions from the chat. Dr. Haynesworth, as you think about 31 years at Case Western Reserve, what do you think, what changes have been most impactful for you? What have you seen at the institution that are some of the biggest changes that you think have impacted you personally and also impacted the community that we're part of?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, I will say that we're making strides. I'm sure that none of us are happy with the pace, but we're making strides in diversifying our faculty. I'm fortunate that I am probably in the most diverse department in the College of Arts and Sciences. So, my colleagues, Emmett Jolly and Yolanda Fortenberry and Angela Dixon, and, we have more African-American faculty in this department. And it's great for the students because I can refer my students to all of my colleagues. And as you mentioned earlier, it's not always the academic things that trip students up. It's all of the other stuff that they need to deal with. And many of our students in the Emerging Scholars Program are coming from local environments where they are trying to navigate Case Western Reserve and home, where many times they play a very important support role at home also. So obviously we have far more students here than we had. I think when I came here, the incoming classes were around 700 or 800, and now they're I don't even know how big they are. I think
the last class was 15. Well, the goal was 1550, and I think we made exactly that, 1550. And I know that's the goal again this year.
Now, and obviously we have a lot more buildings, and the environment around University Circle is also very different. I will say that the challenge, though, for us, for all of us, is that as we bring in more students, and particularly as we bring in more, as we try to make sure that we're bringing in more underrepresented students, we have to make sure that our student support infrastructure keeps pace with the number of students that we're bringing in.
Definitely.
And so I think that we just have to be cognizant of that. That's all I'll say on that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons for keeping the numbers the same this year and not trying to increase beyond. And what you mentioned, and I just highlighted to a student leader Friday. I think it was Friday, or no, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was Wednesday. My days are all mixed up. I just got back from vacation yesterday, so I'm a little confused with days of the week. But that there were 4 Black faculty in biology, and the student was amazed. And I was like, yes. And I shared in a meeting earlier today that I think that's one of the disadvantages is communication. And everybody that works for Case Western Reserve on this call probably can say the same thing about the great things that have happened within our institution and some of the great strides that have been made, slow in coming, but there have been some great strides. And one of those is the biology department. And the fact that biology has 4 Black professors as a STEM field. And it speaks to this idea when I hear all the time, there aren't any, we can't find any for other fields where we know that there are underrepresented minorities and there are minorities that exist that can work within our area. So thank you for sharing that with the listening audience. There is a question in the chat, and it's interesting because as I was reading this question, I actually want to say I'll read the question first, then I'll say, are you concerned that there may be opposition to diversity, equity, and inclusion activities, whether from some within Case Western Reserve or the larger governmental or political communities that pose a threat for the Emerging Scholars Program's existence or current target populations? Well, the great thing, in the words of the president, is that we are not a public institution. And so because of that, but I'll let you speak to it, but because of that, then the impact is limited. What we have to think about is the impact is going to be more so with funders. But I will say to the person who posed that question, just because DE&I, sorry, I get carried, that's my office. So we get pushback every day in terms of within the institution as it relates to DE&I activities. So none of this is new. I was sharing with someone earlier, I was reading Dr. Haynesworth, the climate survey that we did. And I was sharing that, and you know this, because I'm sure you see it with people with the support and buy-in for emerging scholars. You got one end of the spectrum and the other end is that we have people from our campus who have stated that diversity, equity, and inclusion is the worst thing to ever happen to Case Western Reserve. Whereas we have others to say, we need more, we need this, we need to support. So to you, how do you think this is going to impact emerging scholars?
I don't know. We had an all-college meeting with the president and the provost day before yesterday. And because I've been on sabbatical and I've just kind of had my head in the sand, I wasn't aware of this new Ohio Senate Bill 83, I believe. Which I guess one of the tenets is that in order to get state funds for public institutions, they can't have any diversity training and that type of thing. And that some of these provisions would extend towards private institutions too. So Dr. Burton, I know you're much more versed on this than I am, but when I read that, it did kind of make me concerned. This whole and I hate the word, the anti-woke movement. I don't even know what woke is. I just think it's another word for racism, basically.
I was going to say, neither do the people who are fighting against it, Dr. Haynesworth. They don't know what woke is either.
Yeah. But, I will say this, I've been involved when I was associate dean, I was involved with helping search committees try to diversify the applicant pools and working with professors. And I know that, like society, we have individuals at our institution who have a diversity of views. Some are very supportive of diversity and understand that we all benefit by having a diversity of views at the university. And some are happy with the status quo. And I know you deal every day with trying to get us out of the traditional way of recruiting faculty, which really relies on cronyism and good old boy networks, and which is discriminatory towards women and underrepresented minorities. And it's a challenge, because we have institutionally ingrained processes that some folks are resistant to give up. So it's an ongoing challenge, and I think that this is just within the institution as a microcosm of our larger society. And we've seen obviously since the 2016 election that, there's been a permission for folks who have viewpoints that are not supportive of diversity to come out of the woodwork and express those views. And so it's a real challenge.
Yeah, and I think, we probably could be on this all day, but I want to focus on you and not the state of the world that sends me to about 2000 these days. But I think you said it best when you talked about the assassination of Martin Luther King, when you talked about the debate between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, is that this has been ongoing. And so this is something, when we even look at W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and those that supported and those that didn't, that this is an ongoing conversation. And I won't get into a whole history lesson because I can go on a tangent, but that we have to recognize is that when we're talking about issues of diversity, is when we live in a space that's been normalized, anything different than that, it's hard for the status quo to accept. And so that's what we're fighting against. That's what we're dealing with. And that's what we've been dealing with. And so it's really just kind of supporting each other and supporting the work that's being done, but also the individuals that are doing the work to create and make those changes. And you're one of those individuals. And that's, and in spite of any opposition, you and Arthur push forward the Emerging Scholars Program. You push forward student success. And that's what we have to recognize on our campus is no matter what we come up against, there are people like Dr. Haynesworth that is pushing forward in spite of the opposition. And so with that and thinking of here's this opposition that we don't want to focus on. What we want to focus on is the great things of who Dr. Haynesworth is. And so with that, tell us, what is it that you like to do? What does Dr. Haynesworth do outside of the institution?
So a couple of things. I am a devoted, avid, bad golfer, I've realized that I'm not ever going to be a good golfer, but I love the game. It's a time for me to de-stress. Since my childhood, my older brothers used to take me fishing, so that's something that's always stayed with me. This is one of my favorite times of the year because I started my vegetable garden. I always start my vegetable garden indoors. When I went back to the biology department, I got a great office with some great windows. And so I've been starting my seeds. So I love to garden. Love to spend as much time with my dear wife as I can and travel. And I have 2 sons on the West Coast. So I like to visit them when we have the opportunity. So family obviously is important to me. So yeah, those are the things I like to do. I like to golf and garden and fish and travel and spend time with family.
Yeah, I love it. And it seems you've spoken this evening about your family quite a bit. And so I can gather from that how important your family is to you and just the opportunity to spend time with family, which we take for granted very often with our families and not spending that time.
Well, and I'm sure, and these other profiles faculty have indicated, we have a great job because we have freedom to do what we want. But at the same time, it's very competitive, especially for junior faculty these days. I mean, I in the STEM fields, I can't imagine being a junior faculty right now and having to get a research grant. It is just so competitive, and the number of hours that you have to work, and it's so important to try to keep that balance. Now, obviously after you get tenure, you have more flexibility in how you spend your time. I made a choice about 10 years into, well, it was about 10 years into my tenure. My oldest son contracted cancer, was diagnosed with cancer the same year that I became a faculty member. It's 3 years old. And So during my pre-tenure period, I spent a lot of time over in Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, chemotherapy and stem cell transplants and everything like that. He ended up passing away 3 years later. And so that, then we had another son 7 years after that. That really influenced my life in terms of how, am I going to spend a lot of time at the laboratory, traveling, going to conferences, or am I going to prioritize my time bringing up these two young men? And so, African-American males need dads. And so that was for the next 20 years until I got them out of the house. That was my priority. And so, I can say that I'm very proud of those two young men, and they're both doing well. And that was my priority.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that too. Thank you for sharing your own personal testimony with your son. I think sometimes we don't realize how certain things can touch other people on the call. So thank you very much for sharing that. When you think about even your life outside of the academy and outside of academia, what is it that you like that has kept you at Case Western Reserve for 31 years and in academia for 31 years?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I see myself as an educator more than a researcher. When I was at Allegheny College and I took my advisor's advice to take education classes, I went on and got a master's in education, and then went on and taught high school, and hopefully brought those skills to Case Western Reserve as a professor. And so now that I'm back in the biology department, I stopped teaching for a while when I was in the dean's office. I enjoy mentoring young people, and now particularly young people from backgrounds similar to my own, because I see a lot of myself in those young people. Now that we have the Emerging Scholars Program, as I mentioned to you earlier, my focus is to grow the program, to figure out why the program is yielding the results that we have, to publish the results so that it can hopefully be replicated at other institutions, and to make sure that we can endow the program so it'll be here long after I'm gone. So that's my goal. That's why I'm here, and hopefully within the next 5 years, I can't guarantee anything after that, but within the next 5 years, we will have achieved that goal.
Yes, and we're looking forward to you achieving that goal. And if there's anyone on the call that would like to contribute millions of dollars to the Emerging Scholars Program, right. Dr. Haynesworth and Dr. Evans are willingly ready to accept your donations. So kind of to almost to close us out this evening, when you think about, well, first, let me ask you this. Tell us about this new biology course. What's happening with this new course that you're developing? What is that about?
So that's going to be interesting. This is pushing me way outside my comfort zone. So when I taught developmental biology for, 15, 16 years, I came to know about a scientist, African-American scientist, who made very important discoveries in the field of embryology, particularly of how egg cells and sperm cells recognize each other, and what happens immediately after that recognition to make sure that only one sperm cell will fertilize an egg cell. This scientist's name is Ernest Everett Just, and he was he studied at the beginning of the 19th century. He grew up in the South during Reconstruction, or actually right after Reconstruction, in Charleston, South Carolina, and during the Redemption period, when the Klan was starting to flex their muscle and so forth. And his mom was able to get him out of the South. He went to Dartmouth and got an education, and eventually University of Chicago, and got a PhD. So I'm going to do a course on the life of Ernest Everett Just, and it's going to be a history course on his life, but it's also going to be a science course on his science. And so, I hope to attract an interdisciplinary group of students. I hope to cross-list this with the African and African American Studies minor.
We want it cross-listed.
Right. And the Department of History and Biology. And so, I know how to teach a biology course. I have no idea how to teach a history course, or how to teach an African American Studies course. So I will be consulting with colleagues across the university on how to do this. It's going to have a very diverse group of students who come with different skills. And I think that is going to be great. But, I have to figure out how much science am I going to put in? How much history am I going to put in? So that's what I'm working on.
I love it. And that sounds like a great class. I actually, the spring semester, I teach the concepts of race in African-American plays. And it's my favorite class to teach because it's a class that I developed. So what I say, Dr. Haynesworth, is have fun with it. When they give you the reign to be able to develop your own, it's the fun, because I teach another policy class in social work, and they don't let me have as much fun.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And that's what I'm planning to do. I want to have fun with it. And, I'm having fun with it, but like I said, I'm learning something new. How do you teach history? It wasn't something that I was very strong in, so it's a lot of study right now for me. But I'm enjoying. As people who know me, I always say enjoy the journey. So I'm enjoying the journey of trying to figure out how to teach this very different type of course that I'm used to.
Yeah. So Bob Haney wants to take the class pass fail.
Oh, I don't know if I could have Bob in my class.
So as we draw to a close, Dr. Haynesworth, is there anything that you want to share with our listening audience that I may not have asked?
Well,
what's next for Dr. Haynesworth?
No, I just think that this series is very important. And by the way, if you haven't had Bob Haney and Jackson Wright, if you haven't interviewed those guys yet, you got to get them on the docket, because they are legends, and we need to hear their profiles. I would definitely tune into those. So, these are my mentors, Bob Haney and Jackson Wright, and so thanks, guys, for coming out. And these are the gentlemen who I look up to, and I think this is why this series is so important, because we can all learn from each other's journeys, and be inspired by what we've all gone through. So thank you for doing this.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your willingness to be a part of the series. And looking forward to continuing the series. I tell people at least I've got enough faculty to make it through another year without repetition, and actually probably another 2 years, because we've got new faculty. We've got faculty like Latina Brooks. I see Dr. Brooks on the call. We haven't had a chance to interview her, the two names that you gave. So it's great. But I thank you, Dr. Haynesworth, for sharing your story and taking time to be with us this evening. I am going to say thank you to everyone on the call, and I will pass things back over to Tiara to close us out for this evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burton. Thank you, Dr. Haynesworth. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity for helping us host these, for really making these a great and powerful thing. So with that, we want to make sure to remind you to join us for the last profiles of the school year, and that is on Wednesday, May 10th. Check your emails. We hope to see you then. And As always, you can find more information about us at case.edu/alumni and follow us on Facebook at Case Western Reserve University if you search the African American Alumni Association or search CWRU AAAA Alumni, and you can find us there as well. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. This was a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.